All right, and we should be live and recording now for our final session of the 24-hour Peace Wave. We've gone through 11 sessions or 22 hours so far. We have 2 hours left. We are completing our journey across the globe. So thank you very much for being with us. I'll now pass the floor to the coordinator of our final segment and special guest friend of ours, worked with him in the International Peace Bureau office, and he is also one of our council members. So very happy to be able to pass the floor over to Eskil Grav.
Thank you, Sean. Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 12 of this 24-hour Peace Wave. It's been truly inspiring to see all the diverse actions and discussions put on across the globe by people that truly believe in peace, especially in these times when peace as a true possibility seems so distant to so many people across the globe. Yet a dwindling faith in peace is never an excuse to pursue conflict. Rather, it should only serve to fuel the efforts to create change and challenge the current peace and security paradigms, which are so clearly failing us here today. Today is the first day of the G7 meeting in Germany, and Tuesday will be the first day of the NATO meeting in Spain. Now, I'm sure none of us expect these two events to create change. We don't expect these two events to challenge the status quo. But perhaps by having actions such as this wonderful 24-hour Peace Wave, by having discussions about peace and cooperation, about demilitarization, democratization, we can cause change and we can challenge the status quo. Now, this event, part 12 of this Peace Wave, will begin with a panel discussion before we have a series of statements made by peace activists from around the world. One of our panelists from Sweden are unfortunately not able to attend today for personal reasons. However, we have two very strong speakers with a wealth of knowledge in their fields. From Finland, we have Salla Nasarenko, a highly respected journalist, writer, and activist. Salla has previously worked with the Institute for War and Peace Reporting in Tbilisi, and she is currently working with the Union of Journalists in Finland. We also have Kristina Furek. She is one of the co-founders of the Lebanese organization Fighters for Peace. Kristina has lived in Lebanon since the year 2000 and has worked there as a documentary filmmaker, journalist, and consultant for NGOs. Her organization, Fighter for Peace, have also written an open letter in response to the war in the Ukraine, which I will make available in the chat shortly. But I will now let our speakers give their opening statements before we get into the discussion. We will also welcome questions from the audience later on. And if you have any questions, then please either put them in the chat or use the raise hand function. I will now start by giving the word to Salla. Salla, you have the word.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. And good afternoon, everyone from Heinävesi in Finland. As you see, I'm at my summer house. It's midsummer time in Finland, and this is basically the very beautiful time of the year, the northern summer with white nights and nature at its most beautiful. But at the same time, we see clouds in the horizon, clouds of increased militarization of society, of prejudice, of armament, and what they call, following Karl von Clausewitz's famous statement about continuation of politics in other means. Never in my almost 50 years of life have I felt the threat of war this close in my very country. And it's at the same time, it's very hard to believe that politicians anywhere would want a war to spread. I'm a journalist and a writer by profession and education, and for years I have taught courses in peace journalism. And the point that I often have been making is, let us forget about objectivity, since everything that we report about reality around is a choice. It is a choice on who we interview, whose voice gets heard, and also which groups of people and which viewpoints remain in the shadows. Journalism is democracy business. Its job is not just to cover events, but be on the side of a better tomorrow. If I look at the media in Finland today, what I see on the pages of Finnish newspapers and on Finnish television in this country that I really hold very dear, I see materials written by my colleagues, whom I also really care for and respect and work with. What I see are increased reports on the military forces. Every day, our papers report the war in Ukraine, understandably, but they do it mostly from the viewpoint of the movements of the troops, of growing tensions, of politicians giving statements that can be interpreted as threats to one another. And often this makes me wonder what actually happened to the European Union as a peace project. Of course, there are attempts to disclose propaganda on both sides, to report the suffering of the civilians, and to open our eyes to the extreme human suffering caused by the war. But this is not enough, since what I feel now is a lack of courage to speak against the war, to speak bravely on behalf of the peaceful resolution of conflicts. Last year, I defended my own PhD study, and in it I quote psychoanalyst and conflict expert called Vamik Volkan. According to him, we are all holders of large group identities in addition to the individual identities. And large group identity is the subjective experience of many persons linked by the feeling of their uniqueness in relation to other large groups. Large group identity is reflected in mental representations of shared historical events, so-called chosen traumas and glories, where reproductions of past suffering in the hands of the other becomes part of our identity. Traumas caused by the other are transmitted across generations, and so are the stories of past military successes. At the moment in Finland, this narrative is now very strong. Timelines of past Russian attacks are reproduced in the media, and numerous military experts spend their evenings on TV studios underlining how well prepared and unified we are. This approach to the ongoing war in Europe, in Ukraine, is understandable, but it's not helpful. This discourse is led by fear and prejudice at a moment where what we need is courage to speak about peaceful resolutions, innovativeness to think outside of this militaristic box we're in, and also self-awareness to see how we are acting upon our often unconscious instincts that lead to enemy images. And this process has also at its part made the Finland's NATO accession very simple process that gone by with little public debate. Again, I find it in a way understandable in this country and this context, but we do not have a clear picture of all the unintended consequences of this alliance. The philosophical consequence is clear. We have given up our policy of military non-alliance and neutrality. And this means that we are more attached to the imaginary West as a symbol of freedom, and finally free from the so-called Finlandization of many decades. But at the same time, we are now ready to take part in military operations that will bring more bloodshed and devastation to the world. And this serious conversation never took place, and in this current environment, it's unlikely to do so. Finally, I would like to thank you for organizing this peace wave and giving people from all over the world the opportunity to call for determined action for peace. Of us journalists, instead of counting ammunition, we should be paying attention to other things taking place at the same time. Devastating consequences of climate change, hunger crisis looming in many countries, rising poverty and inequality, and threats faced by women and minorities across the globe. Last example being the very recent Supreme Court ruling in the US that puts millions of women's right to abortion at risk. Now, we should raise as humankind and demand an end to wars simply in order to save our planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sala, for your opening statement. Truly a lot to think about there. I would like to now welcome Christina to make her opening statement as well. Christina, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Eskil. It's nice to see you again, even though it's only online. Thank you also, Sala, for your opening statement. I must admit I haven't prepared a formal opening statement, but I think that Sala, she already touched on quite a few subjects that are very relevant for my own personal experience, but also for the work that I've been doing with Fighters for Peace here in Lebanon for the last 8 years, I think, or even more. So maybe I just speak a little bit about myself and about our work, because in Fighters for Peace, we set an example, I think, that it is possible for people to change from war makers to peacemakers, and it is possible for enemies to come together and to work together for a more peaceful world. So I probably just highlight a little bit these two experiences. Starting on the issue of trauma and transgenerational trauma, when the war in Ukraine started, I felt that I've been throwing back in the 1980s. I'm born in 1969, and I regard myself as a child of the Cold War. I grew up in Western Germany. We didn't have relatives, we didn't have family in Eastern Germany, so East Germany for me was an unknown territory basically for a long time, and my parents were children when the Second World War had come to an end, and nowadays I'm working with former combatants from a civil war, so I've been wondering about myself and my own journey, and how transgenerational trauma has probably crystallized in my own story, and how I'm carrying the heritage, for example, of the Second World War, and those wounds, I'm carrying them from my grandparents, from my parents, even I'm carrying them into Lebanon. And this is probably the reason why I'm working with former combatants, because when I look at my own life, I've been working for peace since I'm 15. So I always wanted to overcome this division between East Germany, West Germany. I always hoped for the end of a Cold War, and I felt very much threatened back then in the 1980s about more further escalation, about the looming nuclear war. And so this has been like a red line that's been guiding me throughout my life. And then I came to Lebanon as a journalist, and finally I started to work on the traumas and the wounds of the Lebanese civil war together with Lebanese youth, first as a filmmaker, and then later on also together with my husband, who was a commander of a militia of the Lebanese civil war. We were working or still working on the memory and on the wounds of the Lebanese civil war with youth and with society in general and with other fellow combatants and victims. So has been my own personal story. And I can very much say also for what we've been experiencing here in Lebanon, with working with youth and with the older generations who have been experiencing a civil war, that yes, it's totally true. Trauma can be transferred from generation to generation, and it might do something with your life. And on the personal note, I feel that I've been throwing back to the 1980s, and I feel that our societies are going backwards towards possibly a new type of Cold War, which might not exactly be the same as the last Cold War. And at least let's hope that this Cold War will stay a Cold War and not become a hot war. But for me, the war in Ukraine has been weighing really heavy on me personally, and also I also have the same feeling like Salah, that I haven't felt for a long time, for many decades, that war is so close. Although for the last 20 years I've been living in a conflict region in Lebanon. We're surrounded by countries that are in war, Syria and Israel, Palestine, and yet the war in Ukraine has still another dimension, I feel, and it is like a more global threat. So I feel this is something very, very threatening, and it's been very depressing for me and for other fellow companions who have been working as peacemakers, because we sometimes wonder, like, all these decades long of work as activists, as peace activists, has this been in vain or not? So I mean, I draw my hope from actually the experience with Fighters for Peace, of which it's a Lebanese NGO, but I'm a co-founder of Fighters for Peace, but I've never been involved actively in a civil war. I co-founded it together with my husband and a number of fellow ex-combatants from the Lebanese civil war. Some of them were enemies during the war. And for several reasons, which I will not go into here, they came together in 2012, 2013 to overcome their enmities and to work together in Lebanon for a better and more peaceful future. Because they said we need a grassroots reconciliation process. We need to overcome the divisions in our society. We have to overcome our enmities, and we can do that only by addressing the memory and the experiences and the grievances from the Lebanese civil war, by speaking about it, by making films about it, photo exhibitions, theater plays, etc., and working with the youth. Because, as I said, the wounds of war or the traumas of war can be transferred from one generation to the other. And to many, many people we've been working with, we get the feedback that our work is a sign of hope for communities, for youth, and for society in general. And this gives us a push that we need to continue to work and do the kind of work that we've been doing. And then also, I mean, we've been observing that the work that we have started together with a few other people and a few other organizations has been growing, and it led into mass protests in 2019. Not necessarily our work, but the work of civil society at large has really be crystallized in mass protests in 2019, where large parts of the Lebanese population wanted to have a regime change, wanted to have more social justice, more freedom. There weren't necessarily open calls to the biggest and heavily armed remaining militia in Lebanon, Hezbollah, but talking about security in the country and also talking about disarmament of non-state actors, and this basically meant Hezbollah, was also part of the discussion. So these protests really gave us a push. The work that we do with our organization gives us a push, especially because the ex-combatants who were actively involved in conflict and who had an extremist and very radical mindset and who had used political violence as a means to achieve their political goals, these people changed. And we have former right-wing Christians with us, we have Muslims with us, we have former leftists with us who believed in communism as ideology, we have atheists with us, and so on and so on. So all these people, men and women, they really were able to undergo this immense personal transformation process and become positive role models and become peacemakers. So if those people were not able, to change, then who else will? They were able to change. So it is a sign that change is possible. It is a sign that it's possible to overcome enmities, and it is possible to work and to live together in a more peaceful future. So this is what continues to keep me going, as well as my fellow peace activists here.
Great. Thank you so much, Christina, for your words. It's truly been very interesting to hear you're taking your experiences in this area. For those of you who arrived before I explained this at the beginning, we will accept questions from the audience, of course, for the discussion. If you have questions, you can choose either to put them in the chat or use the raise hand function on Zoom. I will start with I'll be a little bit selfish and start with one of my own questions before allowing you guys to do the same. And my first question is Finland, Lebanon, as well as Germany are very different countries, yet all countries have been pushed into the limelight at different times as being at the core of international peace and security challenges. And from the perspective of these two diverse areas, could you please speak to what you see as the most important challenges to international cooperation on peace issues? I'm not sure which one you would like to start. Maybe we should do it in the order that we gave the statements. So, Sala, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. This is, of course, a very, very large. It's a huge question, and if I look at from the viewpoint, what I'm concerned about at the moment is that back in the Cold War year, we remember the first CSCE conference that led to the birth of the OSCE. It was the Helsinki conference, and the word Helsinki in some good context reminds us of human rights and dialogue. So I feel like now, as the NATO accession process is ongoing, we might be giving up this position that we've had as a facilitator of dialogue and a place to come to solve global problems. And I do know that Finland does not want to give up this position, but I don't know if it's possible to continue to do so as a military allied country. And I'm a scholar on Russia, and of course it's really heartbreaking to see what's happening there now and what's happened to our connections to our neighbors and so on and so forth. And what I feel now that we don't have our focus is not on the future at all. The focus is on this moment today, or on the fights that happen today, on the, like I said, the movements of troops and so on and so forth. So what I really hope would be more focus on the future, on what happens after, because no war will last forever. And we should have the tools and means to live together and find political solutions to our issues, huge cross-border issues, from climate change to everything else. So I don't know if I'm answering for your question, but if I look at Finland, I would hope that we would use the tools and means we had and have had. And whenever I go abroad and speak, I tend to be proud of my country, of the achievements in fields of democracy, gender equality, and many other things, so that we could use the good things we have and take an active position as a facilitator of dialogue. Because even with Russians, we are going to have to talk, and we should be talking. And I'm afraid it's not happening at the moment.
Great, thank you so much, Sala. Christina, would you like to answer as well?
Yeah, I mean, also in connection to what Sala said, it doesn't answer your question though, but just wanted to quickly continue this thought. What she started is, I think as peace movement and as peace activists, it's very, very important to maintain bridges. So what was very, very shocking for me as a German national, for example, was to observe with the start of the Ukraine-Russia war that so many Russians who are, active in cultural institutions in Germany and so on, some of them were kicked out. Okay, some of them, they had a very clear position in support of Putin. Others were not so political. But there was then suddenly, when Europe started to talk about the sanctions, or the Western countries started to talk about sanctions towards Russia, that included the cultural sector, that included the sports sector, and so on. And for me, this was completely wrong. I'm not saying that I'm against or with sanctions towards Russia if the sanctions are an effective tool to prevent war, then I'm with the sanctions, but not sanctions of people, not sanctions of the cultural sector, of the scientific sector, of the sports sector, because these are human beings. They're not political. They are, so they are bridge makers, and we shouldn't have cut down those bridges. On the contrary, we have to hold on to those bridges and use them as channels of communication, as a possibility to influence also civil society within Russia, for example, and so on. So that, from my point of view, was completely wrong. Now, talking or in response to your question about the geopolitical situation in Lebanon, we're surrounded by war and conflict. So to one side we have Syria, to the other side we have Israel-Palestine. Russia is an active participant in the war in Syria, and because of, in my opinion, because of the involvement of Russia in the war in Syria, the regime there is still in power. And talking about the conflict in Israel-Palestine, I mean, sometimes it's really crazy. I know that the name of our organization is Fighters for Peace. There is another NGO in Israel-Palestine which brings together former fighters and soldiers from both sides. They're called Combatants for Peace, and we do exactly the same work. And we use exactly the same methods and same approach and same goals and so on, but we are not allowed to cooperate because of Lebanese law and so on. We're not allowed to have any kind of contact, no connection, no bridge, no nothing. So this for me is really crazy, but we have to respect Lebanese law, so we can't. But that would be an opportunity, you know, to establish bridges, to communicate, and to search for ways of overcoming enmities. Lebanon is a very small country, but it has many different religious minorities. It's located at the Mediterranean. It connects Europe as well as, or with the Arab world. So Lebanon is like a gateway to both areas, Europe and the Middle East. And now with the ongoing conflict or war in Ukraine and Russia, I realized, and I wasn't aware of that before, that Lebanon, as much as many other countries in the Middle East and African countries as well, are highly, highly dependent on wheat from Russia and from Ukraine. And we're actually now facing a situation where bread becomes scarce, poverty is on the rise, people are not even able to afford bread anymore. And I mean, this is the food of the poor. What else, if not sunflower oil and flour, what else can poor people turn to feed the hungry, you know? So it has an immediate effect on this war in Ukraine and with Russia. It has an immediate effect on this region as well, and Putin obviously is using wheat as a soft weapon. So this will have catastrophic impact, not only on Lebanon, not only on the Middle East, but also on many, many other countries, especially also African countries. So, I mean, this is really a nightmare that's going on. So, I mean, talking about geopolitical situation and challenges, these are challenges. We're so connected. I mean, even when it comes to very, very basic food stuff, we are so connected in this globalized world. Lebanon could feed its people. You know, we have, thank God, Lebanon has a very fertile valley. And instead of exporting fruits and apples and so on, you could, probably grow different crops and feed your people. But the world has become so connected that we're so interdependent from each other that we can't really afford such kind of wars anymore. So we have to learn how to live together again, and we have to see how it's possible to end this conflict. And I mean, in the open letter of Fighters for Peace to both the Russian side as well as the Ukrainian side, we said, I mean, conflicts, there will be no good solution to a conflict through a military response. You have to really address the deep root causes of violence and of conflict if you want to reach a good solution to this conflict. It will not be, I mean, we can see it already. There will be no military solution to this conflict. It's going to be dragging on and on and on, probably for years, hopefully not, but probably yes. But it's not going to be a solution. On the contrary, you have to continue to find channels of communication between the two countries, between the diplomats, between the brokers who can possibly negotiate for a ceasefire and for a halt of this war, because that's my opinion and the opinion also of Fighters for Peace, that you will not be able to end a conflict through violence, and the military response is not the way to go about it. Having said that, I mean, we're not saying that it's not Ukraine's right to defend itself. Of course, if you're attacked as a country, you have the right to defend yourself. But yeah, I mean, in brief, there is no military solution to this conflict.
Thank you so much, Christina. I see there's one hand in the audience, Merum Media. Do you have a question for the panel? Hello, Merum. Merum Media. You're muted. Sorry. If you're,
okay. I would like to thank you so much, all our brother and sister organizing the wall issue discussion. This is very important. How to our sisters say Lebanon issues, Syria, including many countries that we are currently suffering the war and conflict and genocide. So how can this issue can solve? We don't know any idea, but I know we are today Myanmar issue, including many long decades ongoing about the Rohingya genocide, including other ethnic Myanmar. Also, they are also violation, human rights violation and victims. So I think that this is no solution for the war and conflict in the people and the life in the peace in this world. We are living in the exile, so we need to something together to solve whatever have the problem. We can solve this problem. So we are today beating long decade 1917. 17 years over the decade we are suffering and beating genocide before 2012. Before we are beating about the 1942 until 1962 we are massacre victim. 1962 until 2012 we are solo burning genocide victims. 2012 we are genocide open victims until now. So this issue very highlight for very time the resolution in the United Nations Security Council do that. But some also when the B2 country involve the resolution, any action plan they are when they discuss about the resolution, also some B2 country including China, Russia, they are B2 put to the B2. The United Nations cannot do anything, cannot be done. But how we can another solution, another way we can hope to solve this problem. So when the ongoing genocide, ongoing crime, humanity, so ongoing the violation, people still are live and the country forced to live and the neighboring countries come to the victim of the human trafficking. And They are also victim to the agency. So that's why we today this forum, this discussion very important for those are the victim about the conflict and war and genocide. This is very important, this event. So I hope one good solution to pin out at this event. So we do not know more to end genocide. We cannot rely our life and our future. At the same time, I want also Malaysia a victim fake allegation, as everybody have now social media. So this is also fake allegation to me. Also, still I also receive the fake allegation. Still also people of the viral social media. So I have been now any Malaysia also to gathering about the Malaysian right, citizenship right, equality. I do not have any concern the COVID-19 crisis. So also people what they are propaganda, I do know. There are some fake allegation, their own Facebook page posts. I become to start the victims about the fake allegation. So many people are condemned to me. Many people they are called by phone, the SMS, also including WhatsApp, including Facebook page, Twitter, all to attack my social account. So at the same time, I was also very worried my safety and my family and my children. So until ongoing. So what we can do next? This social media, they are the benefit to doing. So other people also they are life threatening at the risk. Who are accountabilities? This fake news everywhere. Any the politician, any example, any individually, any government, when they pick up issue the fake news, everybody is affected. So these issues I must be serious concern this event. So I hope that our all brother and sister, honorable our excellency. So brother and sister, ladies and gentlemen, hope to something to pick up this solution to be do that our survival and our suffer. We have many long decade the suffering. We hope enough be enough. So we do not to continue suffering our own country. We are no any migrant come to the Myanmar. We are indigenous people in the Myanmar Arkan state. So many propaganda, military, police, other also minority group, they are more misunderstanding for behind military, put their mentality to enemy. So we become enemy each others. So that's why today conflict and war is the genocide happening. Somebody, their political way, they are use their position and their platform use. People put the people mentality, people heart, people just they are put the enemy by each other community, society. That is very affected those who are live and the society. So we are request everyone, every agency hope to solve this problem. So they are made money, other people life to kill and danger come to the dangers, but they are life to the dangers, they are suffering. So, but I am so thank you about you are give the opportunity speak to me, organizer, and also our all speaker, also our all participated this event. We hope we are continue the do something for who are living, example now Ukraine, before Syria, so Palestine, including Lebanon, Yemen, so also other part Kashmir, also the parts of South Asia, but China, Uyghur Muslim, everywhere affected. China also the many human rights violation, also Uyghur Muslim also killing the many issue. I also so long, very long time also this issue conference. I also memorandum in the United Nations. Already I sent to the memorandum.
But thank you very much, Safar. I'm sorry to cut you off there, but and I really mean it. Thank you very much for the statement. And the issue in Myanmar is and all the other ones you mentioned are very important. It's important to bring it to the forefront of the public knowledge and to try and find a solution. I'm not going to put it on Christina and Sala to find a solution, of course, but perhaps if you have a quick comment on Safar's comment and questions, then please feel free to do so. Perhaps Christina would like to start?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you so much for your comment. Sorry, I focused a little bit much maybe on Ukraine, although I'm based and I'm living in Lebanon. But having said that, Lebanon is in the Middle East, and of course, we will not forget the conflict in Syria. We will not forget the struggle of the Palestinian people. We will not forget the conflict in Yemen. And I think one of the problems or challenges we're facing is to keep conflicts like Yemen and Myanmar on the international agenda. These conflicts cause human sufferings, and no human life should be less worth than another human life. All conflicts and all wars cause suffering, then all conflicts should we continue to be on the global agenda. I'm not sure if I have so many answers, but in terms of violations of human rights, ethnic cleansing, genocide, and so on, I mean, from our, neighboring country, Syria, I know civil society has been doing an amazing job in trying to document as much as possible of human rights violations, of massacres, of use of chemical weapons, and so on, like all the atrocities that happened in Lebanon. There are really, really courageous activists out there in Syria until today, and they try as much as they can to document all those atrocities. And this is very, very important because fortunately, some court cases have taken place against war criminals, even in German courts. Since I'm a German national, I'm talking about Germany as an example. There have been probably also other countries where Syrian nationals have been prosecuted and accused of war crimes in courts, for example, in Germany, and these courts rely on evidence. So they rely on those activists in Syria to document these atrocities. So that's a point that I wanted to highlight, which is very, very important. The other thing I would like to highlight, because you mentioned victims and you mentioned also social media. I think social media, although it has these negative connotations with hate speech and fake news and all that, but social media can also be a very, very powerful tool of bringing your voices into a worldwide audience. So when you deal with victims of genocide, for example, it's very, very important to highlight the stories of victims and to give the victims a voice. And you can do that through using your mobile phones, through collecting testimonies, through posting those online. And because victims are often forgotten, they are just often a number, Okay, so in Myanmar, I don't know how many thousands of Rohingya have been killed, but victims are human beings. They're not just a number. So it's very, very important to make those stories of the victims or of the families of victims heard, and to make them visible, and to post them online so they are accessible for a global audience. So for this, social media is really, really great. And for this, the technology like mobile phones is really great because they can be used as a powerful tool.
Thank you very much, Christina. Sala, do you have anything, any comments or other words?
No, I would just like to thank you for your statement. It was really important. It's an important reminder I'm not no expert on Myanmar, but of course I've read about the plight of the Rohingya people. So it's important to remind us of the situations that still remain unsolved, so that we can also put pressure in our politicians on international arenas to not forget these situations. And I think Christina made a great point on social media and technology, that it can really be helpful in giving people a voice and let the victim stories be heard. So that's also very important. And one last point I would like to make is that what we often forget, especially here in the so-called global north, that we're all interrelated. So if there's an issue or conflict somewhere, maybe geographically far, it will affect our lives too. The war in Ukraine leads to food shortages everywhere in the world. I mean, the problem in other countries lead to increased more and more people having to leave their homes. So, I mean, these are situations that we should be really solving together. And that's why events like this are really important, where we can actually talk and see each other face to face, yet through the Zoom, but still. So thank you for being here, and thank you for reminding us of your situation.
Thank you very much, Sala. There is a question in the chat from Ibala Burunat, who is a Spanish researcher who has lived in Finland for the past 13 years. They say they were shocked to find that they couldn't access Russian news outlets through his their Finnish ISP. And the query is, are these restrictions warranted in the current situation? Or do you have any thoughts on that with regards to the freedom of the press, censorship, and public's right to information?
Yeah, thank you for making this point. It's actually really important, and I think you wrote, I read your message, that we have there's a decline or a steep fall in press freedom. I don't know if it's a steep fall, but definitely there's a fall. I mean, if you look at the Reporters Without Borders press freedom index, where we've gone down, and there are multiple reasons to this. One of them is simply the methodology of counting this index. But yeah, there are serious problems, including a court case against 3 journalists of Helsingin Sanomat, the largest daily, they are going on trial for disclosing a security secret, basically using some military forces classified papers as their sources. And if convicted, it's automatically a prison sentence. And this is really not something that should be happening in my country. And when it comes to the Russian media outlets, to block them was a joint decision by the European Commission, I believe. At least Russia Today and some other channels were blocked across the European Union. And you are absolutely correct that this again took place with very little public debate. And I'm a press freedom activist, so I'm against censorship in any forms. And if we believe in the ability of people, in them being educated and them being able to select and read and choose what they read, then we should not censor anything. So we at the Union of Journalists in Finland, we have been raising concerns about this, that we let the censorship kind of like creep into our societies when things turn bad in the neighbors. So thank you for raising this. It's important, and I agree that there should be no prior censorship.
Christina, of course, this was aimed at Sala, but do you have any thoughts or additional comments to this? You also work with the news media, journalism, and like.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm originally a journalist and filmmaker, and I was also shocked about this decision in Germany. It's the same thing. I guess it was a European-wide thing to block certain Russian media outlets, for Russia Today in particular. So in Germany, for example, we have a huge Russian-rooted community. I think it's the largest let's say minority community in Germany. I think there are at least 1 million people, if not more. And I guess they still find ways to watch Russia Today somehow. If they want to, then you can find a way. But I also felt that this was the wrong decision. For me, the solution doesn't lie in censorship. Of course, Russia Today, they would propagate propaganda from the Russian regime. But on the other hand, and probably we'll talk about the role of media and conflicts and peace reporting later on in this session, but I'm also wary of European media outlets and European journalists. How neutral are they? How unbiased are they? I think they're also, it's very, everybody knows the saying that the thing that dies first in war, it's the truth. And unfortunately, I think that's true for the journalists and for media on both sides of the scope of the conflict of the Russia-Ukraine war. So I also was against censoring Russian media outlets. I think the solution lies in open dialogue and open discussions and bringing people together in critical debates. The solution lies in critical thinking, not in shutting down voices, but in really searching again channels of communication to the other side, because it's the same in peace negotiations. You don't lead peace negotiations with your friends, you lead peace negotiations with your enemies. So you should engage in dialogue with journalists who are reporting from the other side of the conflict and not shut them down. So yeah, I see it very critically. And then of course the question is, once you start censorship, where will the censorship end? Where is this criteria there? So I felt this is a real threat to freedom of speech.
Thank you. I would like to build on this question by Ibala, seeing that you both have experience with the fields of activism and media production. So I'd like to ask what you see as the relationship between the fields of media production, journalism, and peace activism, and what are the benefits and risks of the relationship between the two? Sala, would you like to begin, perhaps?
Yes, thank you. This is a good question. I think especially here, Finland is a very small country. We're 5 million, and especially in the activist circles, we all know each other more or less, and this has its pros and cons. And I think our media outlets have been very cautious in their relationship with the peace movement. They are, especially now, I really feel that they should be using more peace-building experts, not just military experts in their programs and as sources. So somehow the relationship is not organic enough. So if there are some personal connections between peace movement and journalism, like I tend to be kind of like involved in both, then yes, but journalists, for some reason, at least here, they are more eager to turn to the military than to the peace movement when they look for experts or themes or whatever. And that I think is a problem. I think it has both its historic roots here, but also maybe there has been too little dialogue and too little attempts to come together. Because I personally, like I said in the beginning, that I'm always, when I talk to my students, I said, don't believe in objectivity because there's none. So we should really, I have a great colleague called Rauli Virtanen. He's a war reporter. He started in Vietnam War. He's really 76 or something. He still goes to war zones, and he talks about this as well. He says you cannot be objective when you cover a war. You have to be on the side of the civilians, the victims, and on the side of peace. So maybe, I mean, these are the things that both journalism and peace activists have in common, but we haven't been, I think, active enough in really making it real. But I think this is a turning point, even in a good sense of the word. I mean, of course, we see a threat of war then we see that maybe this is the moment where we really have to look at how we do our work and how to protect life, because this is what it is about in the end, protecting each other. So this is what they have, these two fields have in common, I think.
Great, thank you very much, Marcella. I now give the word to you, Christina, for your response as well.
Yeah, I second Sala actually in everything she said. So, I mean, when you're a war reporter in the field, you cannot be objective. So I think, and I think like the audience is not aware enough of this fact that when you're in the field, that there is no way that you can be objective. And I also second Salah that I experienced the same thing, let's say an example in the German media and also the US media, that so much priority has been given now to military experts and security experts, but I mean, you rarely read articles or comments or interviews with researchers, with people who work for think tanks, who work on conflict and peace studies, for example. I mean, for example, the war in Ukraine is not the first war and it's not going to be the last war. And at some point it will end. And those people who have been researching conflicts and the dynamics of conflicts and the different ways how conflicts and war ended, they haven't been given enough of a voice in the Western mainstream media, in my opinion. And but I think they should be given a voice. On the contrary, I mean, again, sorry but I've been following the German media in the last months. When peace activists wrote open letters, they were ridiculed. You know, and they were prominent people signing those open letters, artists, journalists, activists, actors, and so on. They signed these open letters saying that this war, it's crazy to make such a war in these times. We have to really try to continue to find a diplomatic solution to this conflict, and we have to continue to communicate with the other side. Otherwise, we're not going to find a solution. And these people have been ridiculed, and these open letters as well. And I wonder, like, why? And why haven't there been given more space to such specialists, to such researchers who have been working in the field of conflict and peace studies for many, many decades? These should be experts. These should be asked. Those people should be asked how to get out of this conflict.
Thank you very much, Christina. Definitely agree with the statements of both you and Sala, and they're very insightful. It's not always you get to get some of the inside knowledge from people with journalist experience in situations such as these. So thank you both for those comments.
Eskil, if you want,
sorry?
Eskil, if you want, I'll give you a very short, just a also again, our experience with Fighters for Peace, how we've media and filmmaking with the Lebanese youth for many, many years, and actually before they all had smartphones. So in Lebanon, it was a taboo to talk about the memory of the civil war. And it didn't happen in schools. There were no history classes. It rarely happened in universities. And I mean, if you don't talk about the history of your country, and especially when it is civil war, there is a danger that it will be repeated. So you do have to actively deal with the past, and especially if it was a violent past. But then when we addressed youth and we told them, well, let's talk about the Lebanese civil war today, they said like, oh, this is boring, let's turn the page. But then I said, okay, let's make a film about it. I'll explain to you how camera works. how you film, how you interview. We'll write up the interview together. I'll help you formulate the questions, etc. And then we'll do some research together, and we'll find your testimonies, and you'll be able to interview people who lived through the war. And they found that exciting. And it was through the filmmaking skills and interview skills that the youth then actually became interested in tackling the memory of the Civil War. And this was back in 2009. So this was really in the very beginning, before we all had smartphones and so on. So this was our approach. And I think it's still very, very powerful. You can empower youth by using media, because that's what they find thrilling, that's what they find interesting. And through such tools, you can really catch their interest and kind of, channel their interests into topics that are really crucial and essential for youth to understand, so that they hopefully build a more peaceful future.
Thank you very much, Christina. Actually, talking of Fires for Peace, we have made your the open letter that your organization recently published against the war in Ukraine. We made that available in the chat. It might be a little bit difficult to find with all the text, but perhaps we should put it in there again. But in this letter, you urged soldiers and foreign fighters not to not choose violence, and you've mentioned this before as well. But do you believe that the tendency of the international peace movement to put the focus on larger organizational bodies is wrong, and should more time and energy be devoted to preventing people from enlisting or taking up arms in the first place?
No, I think both is important. I think you have to work on all levels. You have to work on the grassroots levels. You have to work on municipality level, on national level, on the regional level, and on international levels. So, for example, with another organization in Lebanon for many, many years, I've been lobbying for arms control, especially for light weapons, small arms and light weapons, because all households have weapons, and mainly most of them are illegally owned. And that's also one of the heritages of the Civil War, that most people kept their weapons. Also because the country is not yet very, very safe. There have been many cycles of violence. People want to have this subjective feeling of safety and of being able to defend themselves. So almost all households in Lebanon, but I think that's probably true for most of the Middle Eastern countries, they all have weapons, or most of the households have weapons at home. And that can be a huge problem, because when a conflict arises, then people are ready to grab these weapons and to engage in fighting. So that does not lead ultimately to more security. It makes your life more insecure, actually. So we had this campaign for arms control, and especially for non-state actors as well. And we started again on a grassroots level in schools with youth, and we addressed this issue through the topic of hunting guns, because there is often accidents happening between youth and children, because they're using these weapons, they're playing with them, and then sometimes you even have people killed by accident, because these youth cannot judge the danger of even a hunting gun. So we started by working on this arms control issue on a very, very grassroots level with youth, but then we took it to the Lebanese parliament. We lobbied for the end of celebratory shooting, which also throughout the Middle East, whenever there is a wedding or a funeral or some kind of celebration, people tend to shoot in the air. And then you have the stray bullets, and then people might get hurt or even killed through stray bullets, etc., etc. So that was our approach to enter this topic on a national level. And then we addressed the League of Arab States and had a conference in Cairo, in the headquarters of the League of Arab States, with different countries from the Middle East, also again lobbying for arms control. And we took it also to the UN level, and this organization, we were representing the civil society sector from the Middle East at the UN level. So that shows you that you can start, work really, really small and very basic on a grassroots level, and then you take it higher and higher and higher and higher, because at the end, we all have to work together, and it has to go either from down to up or up to down. It's not something I would separate. I think it's very important to work on all levels. So some organizations might be better off to work on a larger scale and on a more global level, like NGO networks that connect different organizations, or international civil society organizations like Greenpeace or what have you, or ICANN or whatever. So they're probably better off to lobby at the UN level or at national levels, but then smaller organizations like ourselves, we can probably have a bigger impact on the grassroots level, but also lobby for national legislation, or even lobby in municipalities and convince some of the leaders in municipalities to have their own controls and say, okay, let's declare our municipality as weapon free, or let's at least in our municipality make it a no-go to have celebratory shooting. We don't want this anymore because the risks are too big. So it really depends on the nature of the organization as well. And then, I mean, maybe last but not least, it's very important to be connected. So the grassroots level should be connected to the national level, and the grassroots level should also be connected to international organizations, and sometimes have a voice at the UN level, for example.
Thank you very much, Christina. I see there's a raised hand from Yuri, but I will just let Sala comment on this if she wishes, and then I'll come to you. Okay, Yuri? Great. Sala, please.
Yeah, thank you. Really shortly. I haven't read your statement, but I agree with you that the point is arms control, and for instance, tight control on military exports and so on. If I have to tell a small personal detail, my partner is an officer. He works at the military headquarters of the Finnish Defense Forces here, and so we talk about this a lot. And he's no less a pacifist than I am. So I think it's important that as long as we have armies, we have people that are kind of like committed to the core values of our societies, which is democracy, human rights, respect to the Geneva Conventions, and so on and so forth. So really the problem is the lack of arms control, lack of understanding of the job that a national army has as opposed to anything else. Like when this war started, we would have so many stories in the media, like we have to send more arms to Ukraine. So kind of like the solidarity and sadness we felt for Ukrainians sort of like transformed into this, that we have to bring them more arms. And I completely disagree. All arms exports have to be strictly in control of national governments and strictly under international conventions and so on and so forth. And at the same time, of course, we have to have a system where you have a right to refuse arms. We have people imprisoned for this because we have the general conscription army, and so you have to do that, or the citizen service. I don't know the term in English. But if you refuse both, you're imprisoned, and this shouldn't be the case. Every individual citizen should have the right to refuse military service at any form. So that's my opinion. But definitely, the individual soldiers giving up arms, yes, but that would not solve the problem, because it's on the higher level, on the political level. If the Finnish government says there will be no defense forces, they will stop existing the next day, because this is a functioning democracy and decision making is there. So what I'd like to see is more critical thinking, stronger democracies, less corruption, equal opportunities for people. So this is when we reach these goals, we can start talking about like getting rid of our armed forces.
Thank you very much, Stella. Yes, you have a rebuttal. I would like to ask, Yuri, is your comment also in response to Christina? Because if it is, then we can do that, and then Christina can answer both Sala and Yuri. Okay,
No,
Yuri, then
just in general. One addition to Christina. In the beginning, you talk about the work you do with ex-combatants, and I think that's like brilliant example of the kind of innovative piecework that can be done, even with those involved in warfare and fights. So thank you for the work you're doing. It's really impressive.
Thank you. Okay, then Yuri and then Christina can answer both.
Christina raised important issue of why the media invite generals and other military persons, but not give space for experts of conflictology. I will add such as worldwide known conflictologist Friedrich Glasl. You probably know his 9-stage model of escalation. He urged to prevent arms race and de-escalate Russia-Ukraine conflict using multi-track diplomacy. Do you think it may be not only because conflict sucks all oxygen in the room, what bleeds is leads, but also because the media are corrupted and we have military-industrial media complex, which forget any ethics. Militant United States capitalism invests in media everywhere. For example, KKR with General Petraeus among partners is investor of military contractors, and it owns Axel Springer in Germany. So can influence the Bild and Die Welt and other media, and public-owned media in all countries with standing armies always tend to give good publicity to the army and military strategies because of their special relations with the government, which may be formally legal, but seems like corruption for a pacifist. So how can we trust the media corrupted and oppressed by a war machine?
Yeah, I don't know if I have an answer to that. And I'm not an investigative journalist, so I don't know enough about the connections or connectivities between the weapons industry and media, but I'm sure that, I mean, I know from previous documentaries that I was doing rather about agriculture, that in the US, the strongest lobbies and the lobbies, of course, all they do is try influence public opinion, and of course they do that through the media as well, and through direct connections to political leaders. So I am sure that the arms, like the weapons industry, has very, very powerful lobbyists, and they have the capacity to influence public opinion through media and through political decision makers. So yes, when I worked years ago about a different documentary about agriculture, what I learned was that the strongest lobbies in the US are the agriculture industry, the pharma industry, and of course the weapons industry. So for me, I find the US in particular very, very backwards, and I don't think that they have such an amazingly developed democracy or public opinion. So there needs a lot of work to be done. Having said that, that's on one hand. On the other hand, the US have excellent universities, they have excellent think tanks, they have excellent scientists, professors, intellectuals, scholars, journalists, and so on. And I always wondered and never found an answer why these people do not have a much more significant influence on politics in the US. This is something I do not understand, because you do have the top universities of the world are in the US. You have top research institutes and think tanks, and I never understood why they're not more influential in American politics or American public opinion through the media. And having said that, I mean, the media landscape in the US, I find it quite catastrophic. I feel that the European landscape in terms of media is much better than the American media landscape. But even in Germany, again, as a German citizen, I observe the media discourse about the war in Ukraine. And I mean, I could not believe the bias of the mainstream German media and the attacks that they had even on the German chancellor, because he's hesitant to send heavy weapons to Ukraine, and they were pressuring him. The media, like, you have to take a decision now and you have to move, and there's no time to be hesitant. And I mean, sorry, at the end, he is the German chancellor and he has a responsibility towards the German people, and he has a responsibility to think twice if the delivery of heavy weapons to Ukraine will not escalate the conflict and possibly lead us to a third world war. And the media have been really harassing the German chancellor and pressuring him not to be hesitant. So this was something I felt is, for me, was totally unacceptable. So yeah, so I was very frustrated with the media in Germany as well. I don't know, or I don't think that the German weapons industry, although German's weapons industry is very strong, I think right now they rank maybe on place 5 or 4 worldwide. So it is a very powerful sector. But I don't know. I don't think that they have the same direct connections as the industry does in the US to the German media outlets. But of course, they are very influential and they have their lobbyists. But I think the situation in Europe or Germany is a bit different than the US. I wanted to say something about the open letter that we published as Fighters for Peace in response to the war in Ukraine. And actually, we started to formulate this open letter when we knew that Putin asked Syrian soldiers and fighters to fight alongside Russia in the war in Ukraine. And at the same time, you had other foreign fighters from the US, from Europe, from elsewhere, joining the fighters on both sides, in Ukraine and in Russia. So especially from the right wing in Europe, the right wing or extreme right, you had people joining groups or fighters on both sides, on the Ukrainian side and on the Russian side. And I've been working on the topic of violent extremism and radical groups for a couple of years now as well. And I mean, wherever I observe conflicts, whenever non-state actors get involved, the conflicts become more messy. And it's also from the experience of our ex-combatants who fought in the Lebanese civil war. They said, as soon as you have non-state actors involved in war, conflicts become more messy. These are the ones who are the least controlled entities. So, you know, for example, in every regular army, you have also military police. So they check on their soldiers, for example, that they do not commit atrocities, that they don't commit massacres or don't commit sexual crimes like rape of women and so on. But those non-state actors, those foreign fighters, they are much more likely to commit such atrocities and such war crimes because they're not under the control of national army. So that was our starting point to formulate this open letter. And that's why we included the call to foreign fighters to lay down arms, because we were really fearing that with the involvement of foreign fighters on both sides of the conflict will become more complex, it will become more messy, and it will become much more dangerous for civilians, because in general, and there are studies about this topic, non-state actors, foreign fighters, and especially radicalized foreign fighters like those from the far right, they might be more more prone to commit atrocities such as war crimes or gender-based, sexual violence in war.
Thank you very much. We are running out of time for the panel part of this session. So I will take the final question from Mohammed V. Abu Bakr before we move on to the statements part of this session. And I will ask you both to please be brief in your replies. Mohammed asks your contribution. Well, what is, in your views, the role the UN has been playing in handling war-related crises in the world? I know it's probably a challenging question to have a brief answer on, but I'm going to ask you to try anyway. Salah, would you like to begin?
Yes, I'll be definitely brief because I don't have that much direct experience with working with the UN. UN can be and has been criticized of many things, and there's regularly discussions on whether it should, recreate itself and stop existing, because it's not, the decision-making processes within the UN are not very quick or dynamic, and there's a lot of internal power dynamics that we don't even see from outside. So it's like a very slowly moving ship, and it hasn't been outspoken enough in many cases, and not using all its authority to really prevent wars. That's clear, I think. At the same time, I think what we really still need are these multinational arenas where everyone is present and everyone's taking part in this discussion. So if we look at the system of the international law, what can be said shortly, it's far from complete. But at the moment, it's the best we have. So I wouldn't say UN has been efficient, but so far we don't have another organ that would cover whole world as widely as it is. So that's all I can say.
Great, thank you, Salah. Christina, same to you.
Yeah, again, I totally second Salah, and I mean, I had the privilege to attend UN meetings for the Arms Trade Treaty and other related events, and yeah, you can criticize the UN and other international bodies a lot, but I also totally believe that these institutions need to continue to function. And at the end, in the UN, it's one country, one vote. Where else do you have that? I don't know of any other institutions where you really have one country, one vote. Even if, of course, the more powerful countries have bigger delegations, they are, more influential when it comes to negotiating treaties, etc., etc. But at the end, in the plenary, you have one country, one vote, which I find quite amazing. And for me, I think this is reason enough for the United Nations, especially, to continue to exist. I mean, in Lebanon, we have Blue Helmets, we have the United Nations Peacekeeping Force, the UNIFIL. And I think they have been doing a good job in stabilizing the southern border of the country. And they have been a buffer, between the conflict parties. So I think such forces like the Blue Helmets, they can play an important role, especially if they have a robust mandate where they then can actually really interfere. In Lebanon, it's just they're there to keep the enemies apart, and I think in terms of that, they've been doing a quite good job and stabilizing job for this volatile region. So in general, my view of such institutions like the UN is rather positive, and I think they're still necessary. I agree, of course, there's many shortcomings. And there was a conference the other day, which I wasn't able to attend, but it was about international governance and the crisis of international governance. And I'm happy that such discussions are taking place because I think, yes, it is true. We have these international bodies and they're not taking or they should be taking more significant roles. For me, especially when it comes to the conflict of Ukraine and Russia, for me, I've been asking myself this question, why OSCE is not taking on a much, much more prominent role. And I believe organizations like OSCE should have a prominent role in such a war, and not NATO. So yeah, but I think such organizations are still valid and important, and I'm pleased to see discussions going into this direction, how international governance could be improved and be more impactful. And we're not there yet, of course, we all know that.
Thank you very much, Christina, and thank you very much, Sana, as well. There's very little time left for the panel discussion bit before we go to the statements made by our three peace activists. But would you like to say some quick final words before we move on?
Can I say very shortly about United Nations, because it is important to emphasize it. United Nations is crucial international forum and hope for future nonviolent global governance. It is a pity that prohibition of war by United Nations Charter and safeguards of peace and justice prescribed by Universal Declaration of Human Rights are widely neglected by members of United Nations. You know, UN was created as confederation of the world, and NATO is a model of military alliance destroying peace. United Nations is a model of peaceful alliance building peace. So we should preserve and develop United Nations, gradually transforming it into united people in the world without armies and without borders that divide us.
Thank you very much, Yuri. Christina, please feel free to make your final statement.
No, thank you, Eske. Thank you very much for inviting me to this plenary. I really, really hope that such peace waves or peace rallies, even though they're online, I hope that we have some kind of influence on the bigger and more important public discourses that are taking place right now in the G7 or in the NATO summit. I doubt it, but I do hope that our voices are heard from someone of those power brokers. That would be great.
Thank you very much. Sala, please, now, if you have any last words.
Yes, thank you. I second Christina here. I think when we work on the grassroots level and often seem to be heard only by other activists like us and feels like the wider audience, political decision makers, international bodies, it sometimes feel like nobody listens. But actually, if we look at the history of peace movement and the achievements in the long term, they are significant. So this very patient, sometimes frustrating everyday work that we do is very important. And it's important to have a chance to talk to colleagues from all over the world and remember that we're not alone in this. So thanks, everyone. And thank you for organizing this Peace Wave.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you both once again. It's really been an interesting discussion. And now it's time to move on to the next part of our session. First, we have a video statement from Ali Aklagi, the Chief Communications Officer in Sarbas Sol, which is the leading non-governmental organization in Iran focused on promoting peace. As Zoom is not available in Iran, we can unfortunately not have him here live, but he has provided us with a recorded statement, which I will share on screen now. Let's see. One moment. All right, I'm having a little bit of trouble sharing that, so perhaps we should go on to our next speaker, and I'll play this video right after her instead. We have a statement from Christine Acheng Odera. She is an advisory board member of World Beyond War and the Pan-Commonwealth coordinator of the Commonwealth Youth Peace Ambassadors Network. Christine, if you are ready, then please have the word.
Thank you so much, Eskil, and thank you everyone for joining. Really want to take this opportunity to thank the organizers of this Peace Wave. I know it can be really crazy, and well done to you all, well done. Now, I didn't prepare a written statement, but I would like for us to reflect, even as I deliver what was purported to be a statement. We live in a world of fragility. We live in a world of uncertainty. And as young people, we progressively are scared of what lies ahead of us. And I cannot agree more from the conversation that we just finished from the fighters of peace, Christina and Salia, because those are the realities that we're experiencing. And now with social media, it's even worse because radicalization now has no boundaries because of social media, and something happens everywhere and everyone gets to know about it. We've seen terror groups recruit in all these areas, and no one really is safe. And so when it comes to disarmament and us young people, we are really scared of our future. We really are scared of our future. And just to give a more closer home example, Kenya has been experiencing a lot of terrorist attacks, and a lot of other young Kenyans have been recruited in radicalist groups. And it's becoming harder and harder and harder to make sure that we live in peaceful societies, because our hopes are being shattered in all the noise that's happening around the world. When it comes to youth engagement, we've seen a lot of young people really trying so hard to make sure that they are on the forefront in the fight against disarmament, small arms, and we need help. In a context where we have been experiencing police brutality, it has been very hard to even work with some of these men in uniform. And you know, the sad thing is, a lot of these men in uniform are actually young people who, when recruited to this, to the military or to the police force, we wonder what changes and what mental sublimation happens for them to come out and not protect the people they ought to protect. And with that, I also want to echo what I think it's Christina said, that when we have non-state actors in conflicting situation, it becomes even worse. And that's where we're seeing a lot of gender-based violence against women. We're seeing a lot of rape being used. I mean, the examples are endless. And so really, as young people, we are looking at how best to work across the board. Because really, what is the importance of disarmament? This is to make sure that, one, we reduce and withdraw all the military and the weapons that are hovering around in our communities, in our societies. And sadly now, within the grassroots, it's even worse, because people are exchanging ammunition for a plate of food. People are now holding guns to just get food, as basic as that. Food, water, shelter have become causes of young people to go and cause fights, have become reasons why a lot of young people want to now go and cause belligerences, because it's going to afford the basics that we have forgotten as a people. And so when it comes to policies, we now see the resolution 2250, we have seen the subsequent policies, 2419. But a lot of young people don't relate to some of these policies. They're too complex for them to even start breaking them down. And so we have taken upon ourselves, again, as young people, to make sure that we are trying to make these policies understandable to the basics of languages that relate to these young people. And as a network, that's something that we have tried. We have tried to translate Resolution 2250 into Kiswahili, which is a language that is spoken across East Africa. And largely now we are seeing young people starting to understand what Resolution 2250 is all about. And we realize that sometimes, much as they're very good policies, young people really don't resonate with them. I mean, we can blame them and say, why? Why are they not really getting interested in some of these policies? But who is going to focus on policies when all the time you're invited to the table, you are seen as the problem as a young person? All of us on this call will agree with me that young people are at the center of radicalization, are at the center of violent extremism, are at the center of everything bad. And so most of the time when we're invited to the table, we're invited to tell a story of why this, why that, why young people. And so that in itself is a problem. If you invite me to a table as a problem, then I am victimized from the get-go. And that largely is what we're seeing with young people. When projects are formulated, we realize that young people are consulted, but when it comes to the designing of these programs and projects, young people are not there. When it comes to the monitoring and evaluation, again, young people are consulted to a program and a project that they didn't understand, they did not own to. And so these are the issues that we're realizing when it comes to youth engagement in some of these issues, that a lot of it is tokenistic. A lot of young people are being invited to the table as beneficiaries. And so really, we are focusing on the supply, which is capacity building of young people. But what about the demand? What about making sure that young people are part and parcel of the decision-making process? So the supply would be actually having young people part and parcel of the designing, of the implementation, of the evaluation and monitoring of some of these interventions that are being created in our societies, and really making sure that young people tell a story. And that's the one thing that the world over needs to be prepared for: contradictory information from what everyone seemed to go by. Young people need to be engaged into the conversation because this is our lived realities. And sadly, if you're coming from some of our developing countries, you have inherited a system that does not work. And what we're saying is, would you listen? Would you really just engage us and be our allies? And speak truth and say, we want young people in these spaces because they are telling a different story, and actually be humble enough to accept the contradicting information that we bring to the ground because we understand ourselves better. And so for me, really, is to call us into action and say, engage, support, create conditions that favor youth engagement, play an active role in being true allies of the youth and young women. I mean, it is said that the cost of war is just ridiculous. And what we're seeing now, it's even worse in the contemporary society. And now you can imagine a woman who faces double threats because you can't access something as basic as sanitary towels. And so that becomes something that leads you to become a child bride to the terror groups, because then you can afford sanitary towel to take care of your menstruation when you start menstruating every month. And so really, let us go back to where we began and start addressing the basic commodities that are leading a lot of young people into some of these issues. And as I finish, a call to action to young people to just say, we understand ourselves better and we need to mobilize and come together and make sure that we are telling a story that other people don't understand, that other people make perceptions of. It will take us young people to tell a different story. The Secretary General report on youth has shown clearly that a lot of young people are doing a lot of good work. But then again, 98% of youth organizations, and especially in developing countries, operate on a voluntary base. Some of these young people run organizations, but they do not follow the conventional finance system of how big organizations would expect us to report our finances, because really, our realities are so different. And so would you please also adjust how you look at youth organization to make sure that this speaks to the realities and not the perception of what is out there? I thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. Truly inspirational words and a great take on what it means to be a youth activist and the importance of youth activism in the world today. I should now have gotten the video working for Ali as well, so I will play that now, hopefully.
And in despair I bowed my head. There's no peace on earth, I said. For hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Then pealed the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men. Ladies and gentlemen, dear peace fellows from all across the world, my name is Ali Akhlaqi, the CEO of International Peace Tourism Non-Governmental Organization and the Chief Communications Officer at Sarbaz Sol from Iran. It is my great pleasure to talk with you in the non-stop 24-hour rolling rally for peace run by the IPB and World Beyond War. Many thanks for the organizers and you who have participated in this beautiful event. First of all, due to the topic of our discussion, let me have a brief introduction of Sarbaz Sol as the main peace NGO in Iran. In Persian language, Sarbaz means soldier and Sol means peace. So we believe we are the soldiers in Iran who are trying to make peace. Sarbaz Sol is made up of two main social bodies. One, the common people who are interested in working for peace, and we call them peace promoters. The second part of the community is made by the war veterans who eyewitnessed the dark and savage side of the war by their total presence and now trying hard to work for peace. I think everybody here has heard about the devastating war between Iran and Iraq from 1980 to 1988 for 8 years. That time, the Iraqi leadership, Saddam Hussein, had hoped to take advantage of Iran's post-revolutionary chaos and expected a decisive victory in the face of a severely weakened Iran. The United States, United Kingdom, Soviet Union, France, Germany, and many Arab countries provided an abundance of financial, political, and logistical support for Iraq, while Iran was comparatively isolated to a large degree, and finally, nothing came up but ruined cities, orphaned children, widowed women, and lots of casualties. The war was the deadliest conventional war ever fought between regular armies of developing countries. Estimates of total casualties range from 1 million to twice that number. The number killed on both sides was perhaps more than 500,000, with Iran suffering the greatest loss and casualties. The combined financial cost of the combatants is believed to have exceeded $1 trillion. But why? Do we live in a world of chaos and mishmash in which the so-called powers can easily bully and injure the weak ones? Where have you received this permission that having more financial or military logistics will give you such freedom to kill other nations? This behavior or permission is based on what religion, what morality, what is the source of this treatment? And the second question is, where is the United Nations? The United Nations, the organization that is established to preserve international peace and security. Does that mean the peace among the kids at school? Or two neighbors in an apartment? Or the tribes in a village? No. The UN is set to preserve international peace and security for all nations and human beings. The funniest part of the story here is that the judge has resided in the house of the one who has made or has caused the most violent conflicts and wars around the globe. Now, can you expect this judge to do a good job? We believe that in order to dismantle the military alliances like NATO and to stop the wars or to prevent the future ones, the international community, and especially the international institutions of nonviolent cooperation, have to strive to pave the way to replace and restructure the United Nations and its decision-making procedures and performance. To make it short, in Iran, there are now more than 2,600,000 military veterans from the war era who are joining Sarbaz Sol day by day together with their families and the other civilians to demonstrate hate against any kinds of war and conflicts. That is why we are working vigorously and attempting to join all peace institutions and organizations in different countries to set up the borderless peace territory for all human beings in the world. If our kids and the next generations are important to us, we have to endeavor now and today. The future is bright, live in peace, and many thanks for all your kind attention. Salute.
Thank you so much to Ali and Sarbasol, even though they couldn't join us live today from Iran. And our thoughts go to them and the important work that they do. Our final speaker now, who will make the concluding statement, is Yuri Selyashchenko, who's a part of WorldBeyondWar and the executive director of the Ukrainian pacifist movement. Yuri, I'll give you the word now.
Dear friends, greetings from Kiev, capital of Ukraine. I am glad to be part of today's massive peace wave, which I hope will wash away all lies and hatred and wrong causes for war, because we know that war is a crime against humanity, and therefore we should be determined to resist any kind of war and to strive for the removal of all causes of war. Our world needs war resistors more than ever during current escalation of antagonism between the East and West, which already caused 8 years long bloodshed in Ukraine. Housing and vital civilian infrastructure is ruined. 10,000s of people are killed and millions forced to seek asylum from war in result of great power competition between Russia and United States for control over my country. It is easy to put all blame on crazy dictator Putin or on hegemonic Western empire of lies. But in these blame games, people lose sense of reality, create false images of demonized enemies, and engage in mortal battles without any hope to peace agreement, without mercy to themselves and others, insanely attacking innocent peace-loving people without care or because of hate to anyone who stands on the path in which they and their imagined enemies drag each other towards mutually assured destruction. We hoped that this concept, mutually assured destruction, will be erased from the world politics after coming into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. But Nuclear 5 openly disdain this new form of international law, as if they believe might is right. If you can possibly talk about suicidal might endangering right to life of all living beings on our planet. A part of this horrible option of nuclear hell, humankind faces grim possibilities of slow death because of climate change and famine. Not to say how miserable is life of many people in extreme poverty, in overexploited, devastated, and polluted environment. It will take united efforts of all humans on Earth to deal with these challenges. However, instead of the constructive work, our elites are dived into struggle for absolute power and over profits in their warmongering adventures. Thousands of protesters came with their legitimate grievances to G7 summit in Germany, but leaders of biggest Western economies turn away from people. They seemingly determined to wage economic war against the East instead of dealing with poverty and climate change as numerous voices urge them. NATO summit is in Madrid also protested by thousands, even maybe more than 10,000 people. NATO summit in Madrid is preparing to wage war against Russia to the last Ukrainian. During years and years, so arms industry will swim in money and poor people will pay the bill. National elites almost everywhere in the world are unable to stop machine of war. They hardly control it. Rather, they are corrupted by delusions of easy glory, power, and wealth through massive violence. We need to unfold omnipresent, consistent, and assertive nonviolent peace movement to uphold human right to refuse to kill, to stop all wars, and to build sustainable peace on our planet. We need nonviolent common security system, respecting all individual and popular needs everywhere. We should learn how to manage conflict without war, because war is never a solution. We should cooperate to stop arms race, utilize all atomic and neutron bombs, decrease size of armies, ideally to zero, and dismantle military-industrial complex. Cooperation and disarmament are the most important tasks of our time. Don't let yourself be fooled by claims that freedom and democracy depends on guns, because such sort of pseudo-democracy is oppressed by war machine, and its corporate media are sold and bossed by war profiteers. We need to learn civil resistance to liberate ourselves from the war machine. True democracy will be achieved only the day when power of the people of Earth will prevent all governments from waging wars. There are tens of ongoing armed conflicts on our planet, and all are cruel and pointless and should be stopped. But war in my country is indeed a model of collective stupidity, and it is palpable all the time with every new refusal to negotiate. When, for example, coalition of human rights defenders reject my suggestions to write in common statement that war violates human rights. Instead of that, they proudly proclaim that war have so-called valuable meaning. It is, of course, not about values. It is about insane and meaningless militarism rooted in our culture. Escalation of conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which started almost immediately after both countries proclaimed independence from with dissolution of Soviet Union, was resulted from archaic militarism, including conscription and military patriotic upbringing, as well as overarching East-West antagonism and great powers competition for spheres of influence. This meaningless conflict must be ended by immediate ceasefire, comprehensive good faith peace talks, and worldwide transition towards nonviolent society. Human right to conscientious objection to military service is a cornerstone of nonviolent way of life. However, this right is blatantly neglected on post-Soviet space, and it is, as I said, cause of war too. Ukraine inherited conscription from Russian Empire and Soviet Union. It includes 18 months of compulsory military service. Evasion from conscription during mobilization, as now, is punishable by imprisonment for a term from 3 to 5 years. Many people are already sentenced. Shameful persecution of Ruslan Katsaba for his 2015 call to boycott military mobilization is continuing. This year, more than 1,000 criminal investigations were opened concerning desertion from armed forces of Ukraine. Furthermore, if you hide a Russian deserter in Ukraine, you could be charged by Ukrainian police in collaboration with aggressor state, with Russia, if you helped Russian deserter. It is nonsense. Human right to conscientious objection to military service is partly recognized in Ukraine, only for religious objectors and only to members of 10 small churches. Conscription could be substituted with 27-month-long alternative non-military service, and near 1,600 of people were allowed to access alternative service in previous year. Ukraine, however, is unwilling to comply with recommendations of United Nations Human Rights Committee to provide non-discriminatory access to alternative service, which should not have punitive character as now. Ukraine also failed with recommendation to investigate abductions and arbitrary detentions of conscripts. Martial law was introduced by presidential decree after the beginning of Russian aggression. It includes total mobilization of population without any exceptions for conscientious objectors to military service. Military mobilization is enforced by prohibition to leave the country for almost all males in age from 18 to 60. By serving calls to draft stations at the state border, at checkpoints, hotels, dormitories, now even at the beaches. If you fled from shelling of your city and tried to stay in hotel in Western Ukraine, you could be turned into a soldier against your will or punished for evasion of military service. Amy McGuire wrote a beautiful article about the travel ban for The Conversation news outlet entitled Why Banning Men from Leaving Ukraine Violates Their Human Rights. Popular petition of protest against the travel ban gathered 27,000 of signatures, but was treated with cynical contempt by President Zelensky. He said, ask not me to leave travel ban, ask the widows of killed soldiers, ask cabinet of minister, but of course it is his militarist policies. And also he reminded that defense of motherland is citizens' duty. Despite, according to sociology, 74% of people defend the country by peaceful means, like financing, like helping the needy, peaceful people, and so on. And only 6% of people took up arms. And this last fact, that only small part of population is willing to participate directly in mass killing, while the vast majority, under duress or voluntarily, pretends to support the military, but passively resists the war. This fact and many other similar facts give a great hope, comparable to hope of intentional missing instead of shooting enemies, and Christmas truces and fraternization during the world wars. this hope, it means that a culture of war and violence cannot totally oppress goodness of human nature. The culture of peace and non-violence, which makes us reasonable and sentient beings, not a killing machines. Many things are done by propaganda of war to dehumanize us, but warmongers was not succeed. Russian President Putin brutally invaded Ukraine on pretext of fighting Western-backed Nazi in Kiev. And Ukrainian President Zelensky receives more and more weapons from NATO countries to defeat Nazi in Moscow. But you can't imagine Hitler and Stalin doing what Putin and Zelensky are forced to do, ordering their troops to avoid unnecessary civilian deaths, facing public critique of war effort, responding to international accusations in war crimes and proposals of mediation, creating visibility of negotiations, and almost every day snapping at annoying journalists with their questions: how realistic are hopes for total victory in face of great losses, why peace talks are stalled, and when the damned war will finally end. These changes in the world, growing culture of peace need our collective support and solidarity, our dedicated work for nonviolent future of humankind. In every corner of the world, people should develop massive peace movement and demand of their leaders and elites, drunk of power and money, to change their warmongering attitude, build nonviolent global security system respecting all individual and popular needs, and ensure that world wars or any other wars will never happen again. Let's build our future peace and happiness together.
Thank you so much, Yuri. Truly inspiring words. I would also like to thank all of our speakers here today, Salah Nazarenko, Christina Forech, Ali Akhlagi, Christina Udera. I would also like to thank our wonderful audience, as well as the IPB and World Beyond War. Thank you all for your wonderful contributions, and thanks for taking part in this peace wave around the globe. I now give the word back to Sean.
All right, just a closing word from the organizers of this event. So I'm Sean Connor, I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the International Peace Bureau, and our colleagues at World Beyond War, including David Swanson, are currently sleeping very soundly, as it is the middle of the night or early morning now for them, and they were up late. But we want to thank you very much to everyone in this segment and all segments. We have made it 24 hours completely around the globe, hearing inspiring stories, concerning developments, celebrating the victories and mourning together in solidarity for the difficulties we still face. The world is in an incredibly difficult place in these moments. We all know it, and we're all trying our hardest to make changes. This event is one of those efforts that we are making, but of course, there's plenty more work to do ahead of us. So we thank you all, and we hope you'll join us again, both the International Peace Bureau and World Beyond War, for future events, gatherings, and actions that we can take to truly create a world without war, and with a sustainable peace that also includes, of course, the importance of justice, because as many have pointed out over these past 24 hours, we cannot have peace without justice, and we cannot have justice without peace. So thank you very much. Unfortunately, we do have to come to an end now. We are over our time limit, and we've been going now for 24 hours. So I know there were a few final thoughts that people wanted to share, but unfortunately, we will have to cut those off from this one, but we hope to include them for the future. I know we have a video from Yuri, and Yuri, with your approval, will also share that on social media and other platforms so we can still get that message out as well. So thank you all very much. There is a request to allow everyone to unmute themselves to say a quick goodbye. So I will do that as we can celebrate very briefly the very end here. And in just about a minute, then I will close it. So thank you all very much. You have the chance to unmute yourselves to clap, celebrate, and say some final wishes here.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all of you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, speakers and organizers.
Everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Can I share video?
Thank you, Yuri.
Yuri, we love you.
Beautiful, beautiful day.
You.
Thank you very much. We'll get the